Hello mortals, I am the booktube goddess and I am here with another tag video. And I was tagged once again by Pints Paperback. This tag was originally by Josh the Literary Gladiator, who I'll link below as well. So this is called the Doughnut Tag, and my understanding is that if you are tagged by this video, you have to immediately go off your diet and buy a bunch of donuts and eat them while you talk about books.
Oh my god, these smell so good.
Usually I have to stay away from donuts because they're kind of my kryptonite, but since I was tagged, I have to eat these donuts. Yeah. Question number 1. The classic donut. A classic book you feel everyone needs to read. How about some H.G. Wells for those of you who are into science fiction? He's one of the OGs of science fiction. We probably wouldn't have half the books we read now if it wasn't for H.G. Wells and Jules Verne and H. Rider Haggard. But he paved the way for a lot of writing. My favorite, I think, was The Time Machine, because I loved when he traveled to the future and met the two species of humanity that we evolved into, the Morlocks and the Elohim, Elohar, where the Morlocks were subterranean and had advanced technology, and the Elohim lived. I have to look this up. What the hell were they called? Were they called Eloi, who lived above ground, but who had a very reduced intelligence. But they were pretty. Number 2, Vanilla Frosted, a simple but engaging work. I want to say The Soulless by Gail Carriger. Gail Carriger writes steampunk fiction, and I tried to get into steampunk several times because I like the aesthetic. I never really found a steampunk writer that I could get behind until Gail Carriger. Her books are just so fun. They're based in Victorian times, and the writing itself captures some type of Jane Austen vibe. It's hard to describe until you read it, but they're just so much fun. It's a Victorian world with steampunk devices, of course, but also vampires and werewolves and preternatural creatures. Chocolate Frosted, your second favorite work from your favorite writer. Well, one of my favorite writers is Robin Hobb. Robin Hobb wrote a bunch of series in a world of the Elderlings, with the Farseer trilogy, Madship trilogy. There's several other trilogies, but they're all set in this world of the Elderlings. But she wrote another series outside of the Elderlings saga called the Soldier's Son series, and I liked it a lot. And it's a very unique magic system. But here's the thing, and think about this. The main character, or the magic system, is based on the amount of food you can consume. So if you have magic powers, you have to consume a lot of food and become really obese. And the more obese you are, or the more overweight you are, the more powerful your magic is. But think about this. If you have a main character who is extremely overweight, how does that make you feel about the character, and why? And I think some people have a problem reading a series about someone who's not just overweight, but who's obese. And it's just an interesting little trilogy. And if you like Robin Hobb, you should probably check it out. Strawberry Frosted, a lesser known or studied work from a known writer you feel should be read and studied more frequently. This was a hard one to pick. One of my favorite authors is C.S. Lewis because of the Chronicles of Narnia and how important they were to me growing up. But he wrote this other series. One thing that may be a little difficult for some people to read about C.S. Lewis is that he was a Christian writer, a Christian philosopher, and he infused a lot of that philosophy into his writings. So if that's an issue for you, that's probably an issue with all his books. He wrote something called the Space Trilogy, and there are 3 books: Out of the Silent Planet, Perelandra, and That Hideous Strength. And when I read it, it's really a lot different than the Narnia books. They are definitely adult books meant for an adult audience, and they explore some really wild themes, mostly about each planet in our solar system is governed by a spiritual entity, and Earth's spiritual entity has become corrupt and is Satan, and that is the Silent Planet. And the story involves a man leaving the Silent Planet and going to first Mars in the first novel, and then Venus, Perelandra in the second novel, and then the third novel is about what's happening on Earth, which is kind of a dystopian novel. But I think it's an interesting change of course for those of you who only know C.S. Lewis through Narnia, maybe the Screwtape Letters. If you don't like reading novels with a Christian theme, I think you can still give your own interpretation of the novels. C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, if you haven't read it, you might want to check it out if you're a fan of Narnia. If you're really averse to novels with Christian themes, although I think you can read beyond it with these novels, just like you can with Narnia. But it will give you a different perspective on C.S. Lewis for sure. Glazed, a novel that immediately immersed you. I want to say Naomi Novak's series about Tremere. I don't know how to pronounce his name. The dragon's name is Tremere. It's an alternate history series of novels set in the Napoleonic era. Only in this alternate world, dragons exist, and dragons, when they hatch out of an egg, bond with one human being. And of course it's about this British captain, Captain William Tremere, who finds an egg from the far east, and it hatches, and it's a black dragon no one has ever heard of before, and it bonds with Captain William, and it was meant to go to Napoleon. Like Gail Carriger's writing, that sort of gives you a feeling of Jane Austen. Naomi Novak's gives me, I want to say Henry Fielding, but I'm trying to think of a popular writer during that time, but it feels like old-fashioned writing of the Napoleonic era. It's just such a fun novel that sucks you into Naomi Novak's alternate retelling of the Napoleonic Wars, and I felt immersed within the first chapter. Jelly Donut, a work that contained more than you expected. I'll just point to the Stars by George Takei. I reviewed his autobiography. I was expecting anecdotes and a story about Star Trek, and instead I got a story about the Japanese relocation camps, which was very meaningful to me since my mother was in a Japanese relocation camp during World War II. So please check out my video if you're interested in George Takei's autobiography. Boston Cream, a scholarly work you would recommend to a casual reader. Well, this isn't something I'll recommend to a casual reader, but I know a lot of people that are booktubers and watch these channels are also aspiring writers. And when I was at the University of Maryland, I was a double major with English and journalism, and I had several creative writing classes in the English department, which were basically everyone wrote a short story and then we read it and critiqued each other. Which was okay, but I didn't really feel I learned anything in those classes. But I did take a class in journalism called Writing for Story by John Franklin. And this is the book When I first took his class, he actually had just written this book and it wasn't published yet, but he gave everyone photocopies of his draft, which was kind of cool. But anyway, what literary journalism is, according to John Franklin, is taking a news story and writing it in the form of a short story. And Mr. Franklin has won not one, but two Pulitzer Prizes for his writing. But what I really liked about his class and why I felt it really taught me more than any other creative writing class I had, even though it wasn't creative writing, but it was about the structure of a story. And this is mostly a structure for short stories, but it works for chapters. Not so much for full novels. If you want books on how to structure an entire novel, there are screenwriting books that do a pretty good job of that. But for getting down and dirty, for chapter writing or short story writing, this can't be beat. And he has a very simple way to outline things with just 9 words. All his outlines are 9 words or less. Cruller, a work that makes you think of France. Well, the only thing I could think of was Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell, and it's not a book I'd really recommend unless you're a huge George Orwell fan. But his descriptions of French restaurants and what goes on in the kitchens behind the scenes may turn you off from ever eating at a restaurant again. Powdered Sugar, a work that left you with evident emotions. I'm going to have to go back to Robin Hobb because her last series in the Elderling universe, I believe, was the swan song of her 2 most beloved characters. Fitz and the Fool. And you have to understand, I started reading Robin Hobb when these books first came out. So I've known these characters and I've known this storyline for 20 years, over 20 years. Because the Farseer trilogy, the first trilogy, was published in 1995. So I've grown up, I didn't grow up, but I've experienced these characters over a period of over 20 years. And the story kind of wraps up with the last book of the last trilogy, the Fitz and the Fool trilogy, called Assassin's Fate. I wasn't expecting to have the emotional reaction I did. I've read books before where I tear up a little bit, but tears were falling down my face at the end of that. It was just, Cider. Is there a cider donut? I don't know. The perfect reading material to read in front of a fire in autumn. I'm going to say any middle grade book. Mine would have been The Chronicles of Narnia, or for you, it's probably going to be Harry Potter, but something comfortable and known and warm that you can curl up at the foot of a fire and read and experience the nostalgia of when you first read it. So yeah, the middle grade book you grew up with. Doughnut Hole, a collection of short, accessible works or sections that you enjoyed. Well, there is a novel, there's not a novel, there is a collection of stories edited by Harlan Ellison called Again Dangerous Visions. Again Dangerous Visions is the second collection of short stories or novellas or short works that Harlan Ellison edited, the first one being Dangerous Visions. And there's supposed to be a third collection that was never published, and look it up on Wikipedia because it's kind of funny. Harlan Ellison died before it was published, but it was like, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years that he was sitting on it, and he never got it together. But I bought the Again Dangerous Visions in the Science Fiction Book Club, which no one probably remembers, but every month the Science Fiction Book Club, you would have a choice between the main book or an alternate book that was discounted, or you can buy through backlog at full price. But if you didn't respond to the mailer, they would automatically send you the first selected book. It was kind of a scam, but I got a lot of weird books out of it. Anyway, so I got Again Dangerous Vision, and my stepmother threw a fit. I was, I don't know, 13 or 14 at the time, but there were sexual matters in it. My stepmother went ballistic. My father had the attitude, my kid can read whatever the hell he wants to read. My father, I really respected my father for that, but he was an alcoholic who believed in corporal punishment, so he was no saint. But I always appreciated he let me read whatever I wanted to read from a young age. But again, Dangerous Visions had some wild stories, and you wouldn't believe the roster of writers who contributed to Harlan Ellison's works. Let me just read you some of the authors in, again, Dangerous Visions. Ursula K. Le Guin. This is when her work, The Word for World is Forest, was published, and it won the Hugo Award for Best Novella. Andrew J. Offutt. He's a great writer that people probably forgot about. Gene Wolfe had 4 stories in this. Ray Bradbury, Kate Wilhelm, Joanna Russ. She won a Nebula Award for Best Short Story for her When It Changed. If you haven't read The Female Man by Joanna Russ, you cannot call yourself a feminist. Go out and read it. Kurt Vonnegut had a story in here, and if you ever wondered if Kurt Vonnegut considered himself a science fiction writer, well, there's your answer. David Gerrold, Piers Anthony, Gregory Benford, Ben Bova, James Blish, even a story by James Tiptree Jr. Anyway, if you're a science fiction fan, pick up Dangerous Visions and again Dangerous Visions, collections of short stories by some of the most notable science fiction authors of the 60s and 70s. Raspberry Frosted, a book you would recommend to Homer Simpson. Well, there's a book called Grunts by Mary Gentle. It's a fantasy story about a battalion of orcs. And if you play Dungeons & Dragons, you're probably going to get a big kick out of Grunts by Mary Gentle. Now, the book is way too long for the story it tells. It goes on for a long time. But I was very tickled by a story about this group of orcs that finds a cache of weapons that a wizard manifested. And they were a bunch of weapons from the United States Marine Corps. And these weapons somehow changed the orcs into marine grunts. And it's a silly story. It goes on too long. I thought it was hilarious, and I think Homer Simpson would too. What is your favorite kind of donut? Time to make donuts. Who do you tag? I'm going to tag Matthew Skyarappa, and I apologize for butchering your name. He's a very thoughtful booktuber if you haven't checked him out yet. Connor, why did I pick names like this? Connor Stompanato. Again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. But he does some booktube videos, but he does a lot of other type of videos too, and he's a fun channel to check out. And lastly, I will tag Nicole from I Read Past My Bedtime. She's one of those booktubers or YouTubers that you just want to be her best friend. So that's it for the Doughnut Book Tag. Thank you, Pints and Paperback, once again. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Check out all my links below of the people I've tagged and the original YouTuber. And please subscribe to me if you haven't. And may all the books you read be blessed.